Hello, podcast listeners. I am so excited to have my very own client, Liz, on the podcast today. Liz is the mom of Titan and Tucker, and a big welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Liz called me. So how we met, Liz called me in the summer of 2020 and asked me to be her trainer after reading my book, which I was super flattered. But also when she started telling me about Titan's behavioral concerns, I was intimidated by the case. And I actually, I hadn't worked on some of the behavior concerns before, and I was feeling overwhelmed by the complexity. And I wound up having that conversation with you on the phone. Do you remember that?
I do. You very much did not want to take this case.
I was sort of gently nudging you in the direction of a vet behaviorist here in Boulder. Shout out to Dr. Fagan, which she was part of Team Titan at some point. But yeah, I was very concerned. And it's just so funny because little did we know that both of our worlds would change forever because of Liz and because of how collaborative the process was. And because, I was really learning a lot about complex cases. I started taking on more complex cases. I got certified through the IAABC as a dog behavior consultant. And last but not least, which I think is the most important, is that I fell hard and fast in love with cattle dogs. And if anybody knew me prior to this case, they would have known I was like, I don't really know if I love cattle dogs. And Liz's world forever changed because you fell in love with, Lima-based and positive reinforcement training. You just recently graduated from Karen Pryor Academy with flying colors, which is incredible. And this has just grown into this amazing friendship and collaboration. So I am forever grateful to you. And I always knew you'd be on the podcast. And here you are.
Here we are.
Here we are. So before we begin the show, let's start off with something positive. Can you tell our listeners your favorite things about Tucker and Titan?
Sure. Tucker is my 10.5-year-old oversized Shetland sheepdog, who I originally got with the idea that we were going to do competitive obedience and rally and maybe sprinkle in a bit of herding. And he has been the perfect dog for a novice handler because he is so happy-go-lucky. Mm-hmm. He is happy 99% of the time, mm-hmm. and everything just kind of bounces off him. And he is incredibly resilient. Mm-hmm. He's just a happy dog and nothing phases him for long. Which has proven to be a very useful quality for living with Titan.
Yes.
Titan is a 6-year-old Australian cattle dog, and he has got a whole host of fabulous qualities. He is mm-hmm. smart. He is the most loyal, cuddliest Velcro dog I have ever encountered in my life. If he could live in my skin with me, he would.
He would.
But the thing I love the most about him is he has got a sense of humor. He just cracks me up mm-hmm. multiple times a day. He's just a funny dog. So yeah, that's kind of the top list of things I love about my dogs.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because when I think about Titan, I think what I love about him so much is his complexity. Like, he's got a lot of feelings about things, and he is so expressive and emotional, and I love that about him. And Tucker, he is expressive and emotional, but in, like you said, in this really resilient way, like in this, it's sort of like life goals. Like I want to be like Tucker when I grow up, right? Cause he just like everything rolls off him, like even pretty significant things roll off him. And he's got so much resilience. But I do find myself personally drawn to a dog that's a little bit more complex, that has a lot of feelings, both positive, negative, and neutral, which is the topic of today's conversation about life, right? Because it's almost like I can see myself in that dog more because I'm just as complicated and layered as Titan is. Do you know what I mean?
I do, and one of the things that is both a blessing and a curse with
Uh-huh.
Titan is that you always know how he feels, and how he feels is often a reflection of how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
So um, he's incredibly sensitive
Mm-hmm.
to um, how I'm doing in any given situation.
Yep.
And that can be a really positive thing, but it also can be a really negative thing.
Yep. Absolutely. So let's give our listeners like an idea of where, when you called me in that summer of 2020, like what were some of the large behavior concerns that you were experiencing to then make that call?
Um, the, the biggest issue that we were having
Mm-hmm.
was fights between the dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And those were initiated by Titan and getting increasingly dangerous
Mm-hmm.
and harder to break up.
Yep.
Um, and you know, Tucker was being injured,
Yes.
um, and you know that was obviously the most concerning piece of it. But Titan also was reactive to other dogs.
Mm-hmm.
He was reactive to cars moving quickly, and he is a herding dog, and he does do herding. Um, but getting him uh, in and out of a crate and into the arena at a herding trial
Mm-hmm.
was incredibly challenging.
Mm-hmm.
He also has a fair amount of noise sensitivity, and Tucker is a Sheltie, and for a Sheltie, he's not a big barker, but that's a big caveat for a Sheltie.
Yep.
He barks, and Titan took offense to that. And so, I was at the point where um, I felt like I couldn't get Titan the exercise he needed because I couldn't walk him comfortably because of his reactivity. Um, the house was a dangerous place for Tucker.
Yeah.
And for everybody who was trying to break up dog fights. So it was not a great situation at all.
Yeah. This was where I was feeling resistant, right? Like as a trainer and behavior consultant, I was like, oh, it's inter-household aggression resulting in injury. Like, am I capable enough to support Liz? And I had done some cases with dogs engaging in ways that neither dog appreciated, but it wasn't resulting in injury and harder to break up and redirected bites to people breaking up. And so this is where I was feeling very overwhelmed. And, again, I appreciate you hearing my honesty, right? At at the beginning, I was like, oh, I'm a little nervous, which, you know, to the trainers that are listening, like, it's okay to say that. Right. And for you to say to me, Liz, you were like, well, let's just meet once. Right. Let's just meet one time and we'll see. And so I appreciate your flexibility in this. And, I also want to say that I appreciate all the people I pulled in to help support me, support Liz for this case, like calling on a bunch of other colleagues, to, you know, to get other um, opinions and thoughts and suggestions about this case, because this was a significant concern that you had, right? Rightfully so. Titan's quality of life was challenged and Tucker's quality of life was challenged. So yeah, so thanks for giving us like painting a picture for the listeners.
Well, and I do also want to sort of explain why I wanted to work with you because, you know, it wasn't just, you know, pick the next trainer in the book. And I had worked with a variety of people with Titan before. The thing that appealed to me after reading your book was your focus on, you know, the relationship between the person and the dog. And I had sort of this instinctual feeling that, number one, that was where I needed to focus with Titan. And number two, that, you know, the experience of the person, especially in a case where you've got, you know, reactivity and aggression and injury, it can be pretty traumatic. Yeah. And you were the first person who I heard talking about the piece of how do you feel about your dog, and the fact that you went out of your way to tell me that you didn't feel like, you know, you had all the pieces to this puzzle, but you were willing to go out there and, you know, use your network to help me find those pieces, was, you know, really, really important to me. And, you know, made me feel like I was going to get the support that I needed because you were willing to admit where, you know, there were places that, you know, you might not be the expert.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think when we were at a conference this weekend, Liz came, which was so fun to be sitting there with my client. And you know, Mike Shikashi, I'll quote him, right, where he was saying, like, yeah, like sometimes I'm just like, I don't know, or I don't know yet, or we'll figure it out. And not having all those answers, like, it's okay to not have all the answers. It's not okay to not maybe look for them or, you know, lean on other colleagues. And so I'm inviting listeners who are trainers or listeners who are pet parents, right, is to seek out someone that is willing to say, yeah, I don't know all the answers and I'm willing to to actually help you find them. I think that's important. So today we are going to talk about something that this word is, I have like a negative association to this word, which is so funny. Liz brought this topic up, and this is what's so fun about Liz and I have been geeking out about all the things, whether it is dog behavior, whether it is Titan, whether it is the behavior modification process, or whether it is like the human element, all the stuff that we're bringing into the behavior modification process and to the relationship with our dogs. We've been geeking out about this since last summer. And Liz, as brilliant as she is, brings up this topic that I thought was so important, is really valuing this idea of bringing your dog from a negative response, having a negative association to something in their environment, or displaying unwanted behaviors to neutral, instead of us talking about going from a negative association or quote unquote negative behaviors or unwanted behaviors that we don't want to a positive association and wanted or desirable behaviors. We're sort of missing that in between step of the power and the importance of neutral. Neutral could be on the way to positive, or neutral might actually be the end goal, right? Depending on the situation, which a lot of the times it is. So, can you share the story that you shared with me that sort of spurred this reframe for you?
Sure. One of the things that Titan reacts to is fast moving cars. And, it probably has something to do with herding instinct. But we've got a busy road a couple houses away from us. And one of my original goals was, get to cross that busy road because there's a nice, calm, empty place to walk on the other side. And the other day, as part of getting Titan out more in situations where there's not going to be a lot happening for him in terms of his triggers showing up.
Mm-hmm.
We live close to some fairgrounds, and that's where we've been going fairly regularly. And we have managed to get to the point when we get to the fairgrounds that Titan's coming out of the car and he's almost kind of bored by being there. And this is a dog that, came out of the car hyper alert and, looking for something to be upset about.
Mm-hmm.
But he's at the fairgrounds and I've got him on a long line and kind of following his lead for where he wants to go. And he is choosing to move closer to the busy street that goes along one side of the fairgrounds. And I'm sort of like, okay, let's see how this goes. He's making this choice. I'll follow him. And he got closer and then stopped. I mean, it was probably 30 feet away, so not, the sidewalk next to the road.
Mm-hmm.
And he just stopped and looked at the road for a little while, not in a you know hyperfixation sort of way,
Mm-hmm.
just looking at the cars going by. And then he had enough and he turned back to me and we went and sniffed some trees and wandered around. And it was just this light bulb moment for me of, oh my God, that's how I want him to think about cars. Just another thing in the environment. I don't need him to be happy about cars.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need him to be excited about cars. Just kind of nothing about cars. This new idea of neutral might be the goal, as opposed to happy. And that's how we started this whole conversation.
Yeah. So neutral might be the goal. And I think when Liz said this to me, I was like, yes, like, why have I not, as a trainer, why am I been shying away from neutral? And I was thinking about it, right? Because like how often, and you could be honest, right? Because I share anything or expose myself on this podcast. How often did I really talk to you about neutral? Like, what is the benefit of neutral? And we should achieve neutral. Like, did I bring it up that much?
No, I don't think you did. And I think
No.
part of it is, you know, as trainers, everybody is sort of like, oh, well, we know that we don't want to say, the goal is to stop the dog from doing X behavior. I want the dog not to jump. I want the dog not to bark. And the standard trainer answer in that situation is to say, well, what do you want the dog to do?
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to train the dog to do something else. And for some behaviors, I think actually what you do want is just less
Yeah.
less of
Mm-hmm.
the quote unquote bad behavior or undesirable behavior, as opposed to more of some other behavior.
Mm-hmm.
um, and especially with a reactive dog, I think you're looking for a lesser reaction, as opposed to a different positive, happy reaction. I don't think Titan's ever going to be a dog who loves other dogs. And if I
Mm-hmm.
have that in my head as the goal is, you know, he's going to be able to go on walks with his doggy friends, and eventually we'll have a pile of dogs playing in the backyard. um, if that's my goal for him, I think we're both going to be really frustrated.
Yeah, because if you think about, like, we do talk about it for, like, okay, we're going to have negative association to a positive association where we are changing the, like, and so if we use the word positive, that does create a lot of pictures in one's mind, like you just talked about with, oh, positive associations to other dogs, great. And we're going to do parallel walks with other dogs. We're going to go to a sniff spot with another dog, right? Like there's all these pictures that come into play when, like you said, and like I mentioned in the beginning, sometimes positive, like that's just never going to be a thing. Like no matter how much you pay me to, I don't know, like let's say I hate scary movies, which I have a love-hate relationship, but let's say I hate scary movies. I really, really, really have like a poor learning history around that, which I would argue that I do. You know, I don't, no matter how much money you give me, I might not ever have a positive association where I would love to just engage in scary movies all the time. Right. So this idea of what, as trainers and behavior consultants, if we're talking about going from negative to positive, we are missing this area of neutral that should be so celebrated. Like when you were explaining that story, the listeners cannot see like the smile on my face when I'm hearing him. Basically, he's looking at the cars. Like, I love that you're like, okay, I'm gonna follow him. This is the choice he wants to make. You also are ready that if he makes a poor choice, you have tools in your toolbox to help him through that. But you went with him, you allowed him to watch the cars, and then he was like meh and like disengaged, right? Which is what I teach in reactivity, right? Is teaching that, like, marking and reinforcing the moment the dog disengages from it, which I'm realizing is I never would have put the word neutral with that. I would have just like, to go back to your point where you're saying we always ask the question, what do we want the dog to do instead? I would have said, I want the dog to disengage. That's what I want them to do. And disengagement or finding something else could also be perceived as neutral, right? Where it's like, yeah, I see it there. I see that it's there, and I don't really care about it. Which, like, you're right. You don't need this dog to be pumped and excited and loose and wiggly and react, or like every single time they see another dog. You just want him to coexist peacefully. And it sounds like that's been somewhat achieved depending on the conditions of the environment. Correct?
Yeah, yeah, and in talking about especially reactivity and kind of wanting to change the dog's feelings and associations with a particular situation. There's positive arousal and there's negative arousal. And, you know, when Titan is aroused, we can go from positive to negative pretty darn quickly.
Yep.
Because he's up at that level, and you can tip. So I don't want him fixating on other dogs even in a, oh gee, that other dog means I'm going to get stuffed full of treats. Because I think that can kind of turn into, oh, there's another dog. Oh, there's another dog. Now I'm feeling pretty happy about that other dog because it usually means I'm getting stuffed full of treats. But that kind of emotional state, for lack of a better term, for him, it may not be where I want him to be. I want him to be, oh, other dog, whatever. Neutral, it can often be the path from negative to positive. But it might be the end goal.
The end goal, yeah. Yeah, I mean, because I'm just envisioning like a really social dog, right? Like a dog that we know is socially motivated and they have a lot of they have a hyper social response, right? They are pulling on leash, they might be barking, whining, right? And they have a history of getting access to other dogs on leash because of those behaviors, or they have a history of engaging well and appropriate and social when they're off leash. So I'm envisioning that dog. I kind of want that dog, even though it will most likely result in a good interaction. I kind of want that dog to be a little bit meh about like I want him to be neutral as well, because when he sees another dog, it would be lovely if that dog is just like, there's another dog. I don't need to get myself so overstimulated, even though I'm in that positive arousal. I can regulate my system enough to notice and then disengage. Right. So I think it is really powerful for both, whether it is the dog is feeling really good about that stimulus or the dog is feeling conflicted, uncomfortable, upset, angry, right? All of those are labels, but feeling challenged or conflicted by that stimulus, it's good for both, because it's one of those things where I'm teaching puppy clients more and more, because it's just like, we need your dog to be able to like notice and disengage. And I'm not really focused on the notice, like they will see it because they will. I'm more excited about marking and reinforcing the disengagement, so that it is, we're not building this level of arousal. And that can, like you said, that can oscillate between that positive and negative balance, right? Especially if they're excited in the beginning and then now they never get access. Now they're in this place where they're like, this is a frustrating experience. And now I might go from positive to negative, right? So I think it is such an important skill, regardless if you've got a dog that's upset or comfortable.
Well, and not to anthropomorphize, but it's difficult for us as humans, even if you're in the positive side of things. You don't want to be at the party all the time. Being at the party all the time is can get difficult after a while. When you think about your most exciting experiences, there's no way you want to spend a whole lot of time there. It's exhausting, and
yeah.
it's difficult. And most of us are pretty happy either side of neutral. That's a comfortable place to live. So I think you're right. Even with the positive side of things, that's got to be hard for those dogs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially if they don't get access to the reinforcer, then that's going to be even harder, right? Is that now there is a level of frustration. And when they don't get access to what has normally been reinforced, the behavior gets bigger and louder. And who knows if the person winds up then doing the leash greeting at that very moment and inadvertently reinforces the behavior, right? We're all guilty of inadvertently reinforcing behaviors that we don't want from our dogs. So yeah, I do, whether it's positive or negative, achieving that neutral reaction, I think it when I think about achieving neutral, it's so funny because you're talking about um, the person example. Neutral to me, and this is why I asked you, like, did I ever talk to you about it in this way? I was thinking about, why don't I highlight neutral as much? And I think because, one, I have an idea or a thought that my clients want positive. My clients want positive. We got to get to the positive, right? So there is this like pressure, whether you put it on me or not. You probably didn't. There's just a story I have, right, that I'm bringing into my sessions that I'm very aware of. And the other thing is, I'm like, gosh, I don't think I like neutral. Neutral sounds like so boring to me personally. And really good training should look boring, right? Like it should look, especially when we're working with reactivity, right? It should, like, we're moving slow, we're going at the dog's pace, we're arranging our environment appropriately, right? Like, it should be really boring. And I was thinking about, like, oh wow, Marissa, you are someone that seeks excitement, that like seeks opportunities often. And neutral, when I think about that word, I'm like, doesn't really, it's not fun for me. And so I was thinking that maybe that's one of the reasons why I didn't talk about it as much too. Not only do I have a story around what I think my clients want, I'm also like, neutral, really, that's it.
Yeah. And the other thing for me too is, especially as a person with a reactive dog, it's like, I want to know what to do. I am so used to having to do with this dog.
Mm-hmm.
Manage, have an eye on him, know where he's at, how he's feeling,
Mm-hmm.
is he ramping up, where's the other dog, is someone coming in the house. You're so used to doing,
Yeah.
doing or being ready to do at any given moment. And when it's not working, it's like, well, I'm doing it wrong. I have to be doing
Mm-hmm.
something else. So, I'm going to talk to my trainer, and she's going to tell me what I should be doing differently.
Yeah.
And more and more, it's feeling like that frantic kind of doing, um whether it's the management piece of it, of is that gate closed, where's the treats, are we ready, oh, here comes the Amazon truck,
Yeah.
everyone at your stations, and start
Yeah.
throwing treats, um or whether it's well, now we're going to go out on a walk, and we're going to scatter this and then touch that, and
Mm-hmm.
just, there's a frantic quality to it that, for me and Titan, given how sensitive we have become to one another, it's like, I've got this high arousal level,
Yep.
and he's coming along going, oh, there's something happening here, I better really
Mm-hmm.
be paying attention. um, and part of our journey has been me being able to step back and go, maybe do less, maybe do less. Maybe the
Yeah.
goal isn't, let's get out in front of the house and we're going to go and walk down, the block for 3 houses and see how far we can get. It's like, how boring can I make this for him? We're going to go to the same place over and over again until we are both so bored of it that we hardly know what to do with ourselves. And um doing less is has been oddly reinforcing for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
But if you had told me that the first time we met,
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
I argued with you a lot,
Yeah.
and how many times in the past few months have I said, oh, the thing that you told me the first time we met? I think you might be right about that.
You always did it in such a like, hmm, I have another thought. Like you always did it in such a lovely way, but I always felt safe having those conversations. But yeah, it's interesting. It's like what I hear you, there's two things that come to mind, right? Well, a few things that come to mind. When we were talking about this the other day, it was traditionally when I'm working with my reactive dog clients, I identify what the dog looks like. Like I remember we did this in many of your follow-ups, like who is Titan and what does he do or how does he show up behaviorally um, when he's under threshold, at threshold, and over threshold, right? And I made a joke that I was like, oh, maybe I should do that for my clients, right? Like who is Liz under threshold, at threshold, and over threshold, right? Like what are the behaviors that you engage in with Titan? How do you feel? What are the thoughts that you have? And is that a good time to be engaging in a training session or going on a walk or whatever? Like maybe you turn around and go home or whatever it is. Because you're right. It's like we're trying to undo, and this is a word from our friend who's my coach. We're really trying to undo these patterns that both you and Titan have engaged in, right? And I believe that both of you did need to do something in the beginning, right? So that you needed to become fluent in or learn how to scan the environment, and you needed to figure out like when he was at threshold, when to do the scatter feed, when to exit the situation, when to leave him out in the ether is what I call it, and wait for that choice point of disengaging to mark and reinforce, right? You did have to do all that stuff, I believe. Well, one, because that's what you were wanting as the client, but I do also think you needed to have some success and a learning history that both of you can survive these situations in order to be in this place today where you're like, well, what if I just step back just a little bit more and let him be in the ether a little bit longer, or make his own choice points a little bit more, right? Like I do think you needed some of that initial learning history to start undoing some of the who is Liz at or over threshold. Would you agree with me?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I was so afraid of, you know, who this dog was. What were people going to think about him?
Yeah.
What were they going to think about me when they thought about him?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I do remember, talking about just the idea of, okay, you're going to go on a walk and he might react. so what? And it was like, wait a minute. I don't have to look at him having a reaction as we have failed at everything. I don't have to be so afraid of him going over threshold that I, micromanage both of us into a tight little knot. Just, you know, you get into this sort of end of the world thinking. If it's not positive, it's super negative. And you know apocalyptic.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, my dog might bark and lunge, so I can do an emergency U-turn. I can do a scatter feed. You gave me just a ton of tools to sort of deal with, my worst case scenario. And, that allowed me to move forward, and also gets me to the point where I can say, oh, I can let him hang out and take a look at those cars and see what he does. And there is always the possibility that the choice he makes is not ideal. But I have enough practice around the idea that might happen every once in a while, and we will both survive.
Yeah.
And so I can take that chance and give him just that opportunity to make his own choice and see what happens. And when he makes the choice that I would choose for him, it's like, oh my goodness. It's so much better than me eliciting the choice I would like him to make. Now, of course, we have done a lot of training with eliciting that choice too, and that's necessary. But just me having the confidence that I can allow him to do this because I've got so many tools if he makes the wrong choice. Is really, really helpful.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you're also bringing up a point about like, and when he reacts, right? It's something that like Sarah Strumming said this a lot. And it really landed for me that as positive reinforcement trainers, and I'm guilty of this. I'm guilty of doing this in your case. I have a handout that I have made that you took a look at that like reminding me like we need damage control situations, and we need to not only show the client like how are we going to prevent this and manage this, and then what are we going to do when it happens, but talk about it like it's going to happen, right? Like there's a lot of times where what Sarah had noticed is that as a community, we're talking about, okay, we're going to arrange our environment. We're going to arrange the antecedents. We'll prevent the behavior from happening, but it's like, and life happens. The behavior is going to happen. So how do we normalize that for our clients? Like, yeah, sure. Of course, your dog is going to do this on the walk. Here's what to do. Here's how to help him recover. Here's how to help you recover. Right. Because that's what I hear too, is that you were saying you have this tight knot, and what is happening in this tight knot, right? Like, are you both having a good experience or a positive experience around that stimulus, or even with each other? Like maybe not when you're in that tight knot, versus helping you both recover from a situation that happened because life happens.
Right. And when you've got a reactive dog, and we're talking about being on this spectrum of, negative to neutral to positive, at least initially, you're going to be spending a lot of time on that negative side of the spectrum. You're going to have a lot of experiences that are not great. And, yes, it is better that, Titan sees a dog and instead of immediately barking and lunging, he's just going into a, really forward posture and staring. Is that the behavior I want? Absolutely not. Is it better than barking and lunging? Yes, it is. And it's hard as the person attached to the other end of the leash of this reactive dog to recognize that, even though we're still in the negative side of the spectrum of behavior, this negative is a lot closer to neutral than that negative is. And so that's a win. Yeah. That's a win. He can look and alert and he's going to get sticky, but I can move him away from that. And he got sticky instead of going to the end of the leash and barking and
pulling you and
yeah. And it's, you talk a lot about celebrating success, and I think it's important that we recognize that less negative is a success.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just so funny because when I think about that statement, I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. Do I celebrate less negative in my own life? And I would say I sometimes do and sometimes don't. And how does that impact how I help my clients see less negative as a good thing, right? This is why I was sort of shining some light about my resistance to the word neutral, right? It's like, I mean, all of my relationship to these concepts are going to come into my interactions with my clients, whether I'm aware of them or not. I just need to be aware of them, right? That maybe I didn't talk about neutral enough or highlight this enough because I have a story around what these things mean, right? So, and just interesting stuff. So I want to wrap up on, I'm curious to know how these reframes or mental shifts, how training your eye to notice these changes as a success, like how this has impacted your behavior and your relationship with Titan.
I think probably the biggest thing is that we have given each other a little space.
I hear it.
To kind of figure it out on our own. And, he will make decisions I don't like. And I will be thrilled with the decisions that I do like. But he's getting to make some decisions. And when he gets to make some decisions, it feels to me like he is gaining confidence in his ability to handle situations. And, you know me, I am the consummate type A, make the list,
Mm-hmm.
I've got 1,000 things going, and, every single one of them has to be done just so. And there's always something more that I can do. And, um, but I also have been experimenting with the idea of, actually, I'm just not going to do anything about that particular thing and sort of see how it plays out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's a much more relaxing way to live.
Yeah,
So,
I bet.
we are both kind of just giving each other a little space to see what happens. And it's lovely.
Yeah, I love that. I think that this conversation will be really helpful for, I know, some of the listeners that are intertwined in not only their relationship with their dog, their lives with their dogs, but also their behavior modification plan, right? There's so many things that we can do to help our dogs. And like you said, that list, sometimes that's really overwhelming and exhausting. And sometimes just being with the dog is all we actually need to do. So I appreciate you sharing your journey as both of you are unraveling previous behavior responses, right? And how impactful it's been for both of you. So thank you.
Well, we wouldn't have been here without your help. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being on the show. Appreciate you. And give Titan and Tucker a kiss for me.
Will do.
Only if they consent to it.
Titan will always consent to
I
this from you.
Love my Titan. Thank you so much, Liz.
Thank you.